morning. I love baptism Sundays because they remind me that God believes in second chances and he believes in hopeful futures. My name is John. I oversee worship ministry here and also our outreach ministries and our community partners. And I am continuing today our story through the book of Exodus, and specifically looking at, if we're looking at the book of Exodus, what does it teach us about hope? And so I'm gonna give a bit of a recap. I have a lot of ground to cover, but it's a very interesting story, so it works out okay. So 2 weeks ago, Sarah started us off and she talked about how the Israelites are God's chosen people. What that means is God chose the people of Israel to show the rest of the world how good he is. And so the people of Israel were living in Egypt, and they were doing so well, they were growing so abundantly and flourishing as a people, so much so that the Pharaoh, who was the ruler in Egypt, was threatened by them. And so he and all of Egypt with him subjected the Israelite people, or the Hebrew people as I'll call them today, to slavery, mistreatment for 400 years. And so last week, Stephen brought in a new character to the story whose name is Moses. Spoiler alert, he's pretty important for moving forward. And so Moses, his mother, protected him by putting him in a basket and placing him in the Nile River, which the Nile River was where Pharaoh had commanded all of the Israelite boys under the age of 2 to be thrown into so that they might drown. But Moses' mother protects him in a basket and puts him in the same river that caused death for so many and keeps him alive in that river. And Moses floats down the river and then is found and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. So Moses is a Hebrew by birth, but by adoption is a member of Egyptian royalty. And that's where we're gonna pick up our story today. So what this means is that Moses has the ancient equivalent of what we would call dual citizenship. That he is by birth an Israelite, but by adoption, he is an Egyptian, meaning he grows up with two different groups of people. He's nursed and raised by his own birth mother, but his future is an Egyptian court. He fits in a sense, everywhere with everybody, and his future is pretty secure. And the story picks up when Moses is an adult, and he has all of these things laid out for him, and he fits in everywhere. And then in a matter of 2 days, everything flips on its head. And so we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. It says, "Many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure that no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand." So Moses goes out and he is appalled by the mistreatment of the Israelites at the hands of the Egyptians. And he is so appalled, in fact, that he deems himself judge, jury, and executioner. And he looks around to make sure that no one is watching. And he kills the Egyptian slave driver. He buries the body in the sand. Now there's magnitude in this decision. One, Moses is now a murderer. Two, this is the first time that Moses consciously in his mind rejects his heritage as an adopted Egyptian royalty. So he is deciding consciously with this action, I do not want any part of what I have in Egypt. But he does this in secret. In his mind, he has done this, made this choice, done this thing, and no one will ever find out about it. How many of y'all know you think nobody's gonna find out about something you did? Usually wrong. So the next day, Moses visits his people again. And he sees 2 of the Hebrews fighting this time. And he tries to intervene, he tries to break it up, and the one turns to him and says, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you gonna kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And then Moses was afraid, thinking, everyone knows what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened and he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. 2 huge things here. One is that Moses' rejection of his Egyptian heritage and his committing murder is no longer a secret. He's gone from this private revolt leader in his own mind and his own actions to being public enemy number one in Egypt, where the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, wants to kill Moses. So he is, by his own choice, removed from Egypt. But at the same time, he is rejected by the Hebrews, who say, "Who made you our judge and our ruler?" So all of the sudden, Moses has no people here, and he has no people here, and he has no future in the Egyptian court anymore, but he also doesn't see a future with the Hebrew people. In 2 days, Moses loses his future, his status in society, and 2 groups of people that he called home. And so what do you do when you have nowhere to call home, no one that you fit in with, and no future that you see? You wander. I read this children's fiction novel series last year. My sister says good writing is good writing, so judge me if you want. But it deals with these ideas of hope and identity, and one of the quotes is, "When you run out of hope, everything is backwards, and your heart wants the opposite of what it needs." Moses needs community. He needs a home. He needs a purpose, but he becomes a wanderer. And Moses moves to the land of Midian, joins a nomadic or wandering group of people called the Midianites. He gets married, and he lives for the next 40 years as a shepherd, not keeping track of his own sheep, keeping track of his father-in-law's sheep. And this is the point in the story where you would say that for all intents and purposes, Moses is washed up. He is a has-been. His time has come and gone. He had his shot and he missed it. If you're under the age of 22, you would say he sold. Have you ever felt like you had your shot and you missed it? Like for all intents and purposes at this point in life, you are washed up, used up, and you don't know where you fit in, and you don't see a purpose for your future anymore. One of my first jobs that I ever had, I had very high expectations for myself, I will say, and it turns out that I was sorely overestimating my own abilities. And so I started this job, and I struggled every single day. And I kept a journal to remind myself of the purpose of what I was doing because I was struggling so much. And I remember one day, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was wheeling a broken chair across a parking lot, and I thought to myself, I think I missed my chance to change the world. Have you ever felt like you think you missed your chance to change the world? And what I wish I could tell my, I don't know how old I was at that time, self, and what someone probably did try to tell me, but I didn't realize at the time, is that there is a difference between preparation and purposelessness. And that the things that I learned in that specific time period of my life were the groundwork for everything that I would do afterwards. And that's how Moses' story is. He has no idea what these 40 years watching sheep are preparing him for, but God does. And an interesting story gets even more interesting. Exodus chapter 3. One day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire in the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. "This is amazing," Moses said to himself. "Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it." So I imagine we would all say. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And when Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then the Lord said to him, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile land, spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites now live. Look, the The cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt. This is the premise of everything that I am going to say today, the overview of everything else that's going to come out of my mouth. There is no choice or mistake that you have made. There is no rejection that you have experienced. There is no loss that you have endured that stops God from having a purpose for the future of your life. And because of that reason, there is no fall from grace that disqualifies you from hope. For some of you, this is not a big deal, and I get that, because you might not have experienced this, but for some of you, you know what it feels like to make one decision that changes the entire trajectory of your life, and you will never go back to the way things were. And for some of you, you know what it feels like to go to the people that you thought were always going to be home to you and have them tell you that you are no longer welcome. You know what it feels like to lose. And in that moment, it's hard to believe that anything good could ever come from your life again. Moses' story is a story of a man who had two groups of people, immense wealth and a future in Egyptian royalty, and he lost all of it in 2 days. If there has ever been the story of a person who has no reason to hope, it is Moses here and now. And in that place, God comes to Moses. It's important to not miss this. Moses does not approach God first. God places a burning bush in the midst of Moses' ordinary day-to-day life. Moses' role is to pay attention. Part of restoring hope is choosing to pay attention to God. When something gets your attention in the middle of an ordinary day, maybe it's a beautiful sunrise that catches your eye while you're on your way to drive your kids to school in the morning. Maybe it's an interruption in the middle of your workday that you weren't expecting, or a call or a text from a friend that you haven't heard of in a long time. Because of the busyness of our lives, we're tempted to just power through those things and keep moving. But sometimes that is God getting our attention in the middle of an ordinary day. Part of restoring hope is choosing in that moment to turn and pay attention to God. And Moses does. And the first thing that God says when Moses pays attention is Moses' name. Moses. Moses. You like how I dropped God's voice down? Because obviously God has a deep voice. To a person who feels like they belong nowhere, the first thing that God does is to call Moses' name. You don't feel known, Moses, but I know you. So you might feel like you go through your whole day and no one notices you and no one appreciates you, but I am here to tell you God knows your name, your specific individual name. And part of restoring hope is understanding that God knows you. There's a psalm where the psalmist writes about God's intricate knowledge. He says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb." And then again, he says, "How precious are your thoughts towards me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand, and when I wake up, you're still with me." No matter how unknown, unlovable, and purposeless you have ever felt, there has never been a moment where you were unknown to your Heavenly Father. Never, ever. And once God has established that he knows Moses, then he gives him a redeemer's purpose. God says, "I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and I have come down to rescue them. Now go, for I am sending you, Moses, to Pharaoh, and you must lead my people out of Egypt." And here's an interesting thing. The future that God offers to you in your lowest moment is unlikely to look the same as the future that you would have chosen for yourself, but it will always be a selfless purpose. God's call is not just a purpose for the sake of Moses. It is for the sake of all Israel. 40 years before, Moses murdered one Egyptian slave driver in secrecy. Now, God says, I want you to walk into Pharaoh's house and publicly demand that all of Israel be set free. 40 years before, Moses is rejected by two of the Hebrew people. Now God says, I want you to lead all of those people into the land that I have prepared for them. It won't look the way that you thought it was going to look. So when God gets your attention, when you choose to pay attention, don't just listen for what you think God should be saying. Be willing to let go enough to listen to what God is saying. And so now, Moses has wandered for 40 years, and God comes to him and calls his name and presents this invitation in his lap. But it's no small task that God is asking of Moses. And this is how Moses responds. It says in Exodus 3, but Moses protested to God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. Surely that's enough for Moses. But Moses protested. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. So God calls Moses his name. He gives Moses an invitation. And the first thing that Moses does is discredit himself. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And it's easy for us to judge Moses in this moment, but remember that he has lived the last 40 years of his life as a quote unquote has been. A couple weeks ago, I was at a youth conference leading a small group of high school students, and the topic was, what are the things in your life, the areas where you struggle in your faith? So it could be, things like reading your Bible or praying or worshiping, taking a Sabbath, those types of disciplines. And this high school girl said, she was like, I struggle with when I'm asked to pray out loud. She's like, I pray to God on my own all day long, no problem. But when someone asks me to pray in a group setting, I really, really struggle with that. And so we talked about how oftentimes we feel like we need to have the correct language. But what I said was, I was like, talk to God like you're talking to someone at the Uno table. Like, talk to God like you're talking to a friend. And so we had this conversation. She understood. And then we kept going. We progressed in the rest of our conversation. We got to the end, and somebody had to pray to close out the group. So you bet my head swiveled, looked her right in the windows of her soul. And I was like, pray us out. Her eyes were like, and she was like, no. I was like, yeah. You think about everything that we just talked about, pray us out. She was like, no, I'm good. I was like, no, you're not. You're gonna do this. And she said, reverse, draw two, amen. So if you're wondering how we're doing with the next generation, spot out. She wasn't incapable. She was afraid. There's a distinction that we have to draw here. Oftentimes, we are not incapable of obedience, but we are afraid. We're afraid to talk to somebody that other people don't like or other people stay away from or who's different from us. We're afraid to believe that God would bless me just because he loves me. I'm afraid to take the first steps towards a restored family or friend relationship. I'm afraid to believe that God would have a purpose for my life that could change the world for better at all. I'm not incapable of being obedient, I'm just afraid. Moses is not incapable of walking to Pharaoh's house. He's not incapable of leading the people of Israel out of Egypt. He's not incapable of obedience, but he is afraid. He has a past of rejection. He has a past of sin. He has a past of lost hope, and he has a past of fear. God spoke Moses' name, and it wasn't enough for him to hope again. God gave Moses an invitation to a future, and it wasn't enough for him to hope again. It's my second quote from that book series. The main character's name is Janner, and he says, "So once someone remembers their true name, they're cured?" And the answer is, I wish it were so. We all forget from time to time, and so we need each other to tell us our stories. Sometimes a story is the only way back from the darkness. Moses knows his own story. He does not need to be reminded of how he got to where he is today. So God tells Moses God's story. It says, God replied to Moses, "I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." And he also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations." This is what God is calling to Moses' mind when he says, "I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." I'm not going to get into all of these stories, but they're all in the book of Genesis, the first book in the Bible, if you want to read them. He is saying, I am the God who keeps all of my promises. I am the God who delivers my people from evil. I am the God who's faithful even when you're not faithful. I am a God who is capable of working miracles to bring about good things in your life. You will never choose to hope if you focus on your story. There's way too much loss. There's way too much rejection. You've made too many mistakes, and you have too much fear. You can always choose to hope if you choose to focus on God's story. And this is God's story. That thousands of years after Moses lived and died, another man would walk the earth and his name would be Jesus. And just like God in this story, he would say, before Abraham was, I am. That he would keep all of his promises, just like God. That he would deliver people from their addictions and their illnesses and their sins. That he would be faithful even when everyone around him was not. That he would work miracles to bring about good things. And that he would be completely innocent of evil. And just like Moses, there would come a time in which he was rejected, betrayed by the people who he called home, tried for crimes that he did not commit, and placed on a cross, which was a symbol of not just death, but of torture. And he would say the words, "It is finished." And in that moment, when Jesus said, "It is finished," everybody there thought to themselves, he had his shot and he missed it. But that's not what Jesus meant when he said it is finished. He meant that death was finished. That shame as a controller of your future was finished. That fear and anxiety as the drivers of your decision-making were finished. That the punishment of everything that you have ever done, intentional or accidental, and everything that you ever will do could be placed on that man's shoulders, Jesus Christ, because he didn't deserve it. The punishment for everything we have ever done was met by love in Jesus Christ. And so the only way that you can choose to hope in any situation is if you place your focus not on your story, but on the story of Jesus Christ and the love that God has for you. I'm gonna invite the worship team out. And I'm actually gonna invite you to close your eyes for this last process. I don't know where you stand this morning, but I believe what Sarah said 2 weeks ago, that hope is not an emotion that you feel, hope is a choice that you make. And I don't know what your choice is. Maybe your choice this morning is to believe that God actually does keep his promises. Maybe your choice is to believe that God delivers you from evil, that he's faithful even though you haven't been faithful, that he's capable of working miracles, that he's capable of bringing about good things. Maybe your hope is to believe that there's a future where anxiety and fear don't drive your decision making. Maybe it's to dream of a future, to believe for a future, to hope for a future that doesn't involve addiction, that doesn't involve depression, that doesn't involve broken relationship. Maybe you need to choose to believe this morning that even though you have done many, many things wrong, you're not only forgiven, but you're given a future. So what I want you to know this morning is that there is no fall from grace that has ever or will ever disqualify you from hope. God has called your name. God has given you purpose, an invitation to hope again. And the reason that you can always choose to hope is because of his story and his love for you. Lord, in the moments where we find ourselves feeling as though we are not just a blank canvas, we're a tattered canvas, we're a torn canvas. Would you remind us that the beauty that is painted in our lives does not come from how good we are or what the good things are that we have done. It comes from your love for us. That you looked at us and you decided that it was worth it to send your son to die a death that we deserve, to receive a punishment that we deserve, so that we could have life and purpose and hope. In Jesus' name. Would you stand and respond in worship with us?